Okay, thank you very much for the three participants for such interesting presentation. I'm sure there will be questions, so raise your hand. Ambassador.
Well, it's more some remarks because Brazil has been mentioned throughout very often. And I'm very glad that we are utilizing benchmarks as well. But two issues. First, Brazil's commercial strategy was called into question, and also Brazil's integration strategy. I think Brazil's Brazil's commercial strategy is really very much focused on WTO. That is why we have not really placed so much emphasis on bilateral or even bi-regional understandings, although we are pursuing and we're very much interested in concluding the Mercosur-European Union trade agreement. But all of these, let's say, limited agreements are very much limited in basic, what the Americans have called systemic issues, which are not dealt with in bilateral trade agreements. That means subsidies for agriculture, which is a fundamental element for Brazil. That means anti-dumping, that means anti-subsidies, which are the main obstructive elements from all developed countries. They don't use tariffs, they use, especially the United States. So the benefit of increasing those is a little cosmetic and sometimes a show for other purposes, because the true entry value of these agreements with the developed countries to Brazil is questionable. So we pursue WTO, and we are very committed to WTO, and we have presented a candidate because of that. In relation to Brazil's integration strategy, we look for inclusive integration, not for exclusive integration. And of course, that is not the intent of the originators of the Pacific strategy, but the name itself is already exclusive. And it creates difficulties for, perceptions, if not real issues. Was that the intent? Is that something that has to do with some, my good friend Mauricio tells us there's no ideology involved, but obviously there was some direction that was taken. Why? And this specific issue, it presents the facade of exclusiveness. Brazil is interested in inclusive integration and is committed to that. In fact, I think your picture is very valid with one exception. CELAC was also a Brazilian initiative. All of those holistic integration projects in Latin America count with Brazilian support, and most of them with Brazilian initiatives. So just very brief remarks in relation to the issues that were raised.
Thank you. Yeah, quick comments.
I'd like to make 4 very quick comments. In relation to Michael's comment about Mexico, yeah, of course, Mexico's priority, the most important interest of Mexico is the U.S. But Mexico has learned through very difficult experiences that it cannot depend so much on the U.S. And that's why the Pacific Alliance is a good move for them, because they will have partners that have growing economies, diversified economies, and they will therefore reduce the risk of excessive dependency on the U.S. That's why Mexico is interested in the Pacific Alliance, and of course it's very welcome. Second point, in relation to your question, and Gianluca and Alex also raised that point. What type of integration? What are you trying to do with this Pacific Alliance? And I think here's a fundamental difference with previous experiences. The answer to this question has to be provided by the business community, not by government officials or by experts in trade. The governments, what they do is they create the conditions. They facilitate the interaction of the business community. They create the framework. They allow the free movement of people, goods, services, capitals, etc. And then it's up to the business people to decide. And I am personally convinced that they are much smarter than the experts or the bureaucrats or government officials in deciding what type of integration. And I think that's a very important practical difference between the other strategies that have been a failure in the past, because some people sitting in an office decided which was the type of integration that made sense. And I am fully in favor of the private sector taking that decision, with the support, of course, with the help, with the assistance, with the creation of the framework, with the creation of the conditions by the government, but it's up to the finance people, to the business people. Now, in relation to marketing and brand, no, not really. I don't think this is a brand. I don't think it's politics. I think that there is a genuine interest in taking advantage of the opportunities that I described. And I corrected Michael. I have no experience at all in marketing. I never spent 1 week working in marketing. I spent many years working in finance, looking at numbers, at data, hard evidence. And that's why I'm optimistic about the Pacific Alliance, because I see very solid evidence of progress being made. Just one example of this evidence. Chile was the largest investor, foreign investor in Colombia last year, $5 billion. If somebody would have mentioned that 3 or 4 years ago, that Chile was going to be the largest investor in Colombia, I would say, you're crazy. There's no way. I'm not saying that it's entirely due to the Pacific Alliance, but the Pacific Alliance has raised the awareness, has raised the interest, has eliminated barriers, obstacles, has made this conversation between our business people, Mexicans, Peruvians, Colombians, Chileans, start to take place. Now you see lots of Mexicans in Bogota. That was not the case a couple of years ago. Now we see lots of Colombians in Peru doing deals and joint ventures with Peruvian business people in the agricultural sector, for example. And I think that they will decide which is the integration strategy and the best value-added chain, etc., etc. And the last point, yes, Michael, we are far apart geographically, 10,000 miles, kilometers. It takes forever to go from one place to another. But I don't think that geography is that important in terms of distance, because we have 3 other elements that are much more important than the distances that unite us, which are culture. The cultures in Colombia, Mexico, Peru, and Chile are quite similar, and particularly the business culture. And now, I know that from experience, my previous experience. I'm not a career diplomat, and I spent many years in the private sector in visiting these countries, and I know that business people in these 4 countries can communicate very easily, and it's happening. We have the same language, and we have the same time zone, and we have, in many cases, in many sectors, complementary economic activity. So that's why I don't think it is just a marketing gimmick or a nice brand or a nice concept. I think there's lots of substance. It's true that it needs to be developed. It's true that it needs to be worked out, but there's substance there. And the Ambassador Jaguaribe, my friend Roberto, of course, I'm sure that the intention with the name Pacific Alliance was not to exclude, and I agree with you that we should not, in Latin America or in the world, look at strategies to exclude anybody. I am very much in favor of having the world as a global market for everybody as soon as possible, but we have to build this global market through different trading blocks, and I think that this is a contribution to that, not something against that, because I share your country's final strategy, and I think that this will not be an obstacle. It was not created. This is not created to attack or to defend from ALBA or to try to weaken UNASUR or to try to exclude Brazil from the Pacific, or what. I'm absolutely sure of that. It was just made sense, economic sense, and we're taking advantage of the strengths of our countries and the possibility of creating synergies. That's why I think it's a good idea, and it will have a good future.
Yes, of course. I just wanted to say to Roberto that, of course, I agree with you that you're absolutely right about the importance of the Doha round and the iniquity of agricultural subsidies in Europe. The problem is there's been absolutely no progress for more than a decade, and I think and we can lament that. We can agree to lament that. But I mean, I see the Pacific Alliance as a response to that